I think most of you know me. I'm Joe Shields. I'm the interim dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I want to welcome you today and thank you for coming out for our session on increasing your grant intelligence. And it is a priority for our university leadership, President Nellis and the provost, as well as me in my role as interim dean, that we strive to nurture a more robust culture of research and scholarship in the College of Arts and Sciences as well as across the university. And this is one step we're trying to do to help faculty in our quest for that goal. Okay, so I want to thank our research and scholarship committee, the College of Arts and Sciences, who were essential to putting this together. And they are from the far end to the near end. Dr. Steve Miner from history, Alan Showalter from environmental and plant biology, Julie Owens from psychology, and Sergio Ulloa from physics and astronomy. And they are really the people who put this together, so thank you very much. I also want to thank the research division, and we have with us today Dr. Roxanne Male-Bruni, and seated at the table here is Dr. Marta Gomez, both of whom are key resources in terms of nurturing our research culture at the university. So I'm going to start with some preliminary statements, and then we'll be handing it off to other people at this table. And this is also intended to be interactive. So if you have questions along the way, please voice those, and there should be time for discussion. We are capturing this by video over here, and so that's why I'm standing here making sure I have this microphone close to my mouth, and hopefully is it working?
Yeah, certainly.
Through the podium. For better mic pickup, or okay, so there's an issue with mic pickup, so I guess I will do the podium, because how's that? That sounds a lot louder, doesn't it? Okay. The only problem is some of you will have to, recognize that I'm here even though you can't see me through that pillar, so apologize for the setup here, but we will do the podium mic. Okay, so let me say a few preliminary words, and part of this is almost philosophical, in that it does, even though I'm trying to encourage people to pursue more funding through grants, I get a little irritated sometimes when it turns into a fixation. And that is, I think it's really critical to remember that extramural funding, grants, are really a means to an end. They're not an end in themselves, right? We're writing those to enable you to do something that's important in the mission of the university, which is research, or one of the other things we do here related to teaching or service. And it's not the grant per se that matters. It's what it enables you to do, okay? So I want everyone to understand that it's not just to get more money, it's to do great stuff at the university. It is the case that grants are often used as an indicator about the level of scholarship and research activity at a university. We all know that, but it's really formalized. For example, the National Science Foundation has us and every other university in the United States report our research expenditures, most of which are driven by grants, every year. You can look up what it is for every university in the country, and there's a lot of intercomparison that happens, and it feeds into things like rankings for our university. So I'll come back and say the money itself is not the point, it's what it allows you to do, but it's often used as an indicator of your level of activity. That's the reality we're in. Okay, so why are we writing these grants? Again, a means to an end, not an end in itself. We all know that to varying degrees, getting funding, external funding, is important or even critical to carrying out a robust scholarly program. If you are in chemistry and you have large quantities of consumables that you need to go through and provide provision for your lab in order to carry out the kind of work that you do, you're going to have to get the funding somewhere to do that, or your scholarship does not happen, right? And so that's where the grants are really critical. On the other hand, if you are a scholar of English literature, you primarily work in the library, that funding may seem far less essential to what you need to do to advance your program. But as I said here on the slide at the bottom, imagine what you could do if you were that English scholar and you did have a grant, right? There's all kinds of fantastic things you could do to raise the profile of scholarship, give it more visibility, interface with other people in your field, through conferences. You could hire a postdoctoral scholar, speaker series, hire students, right? There's all kinds of things you could do. So think big, right? Think expansively beyond, maybe the narrow focus of what you're doing with your program and your next publication in terms of how it can advance the agenda and the intellectual environment of this university, which is the goal. Okay, so we tend to sometimes, in talking about external funding and grants, we sometimes tend to zoom into like the big dollar projects from National Institutes of Health or National Science Foundation. But I want to reinforce that in many fields, small amounts of funding can actually be very influential, right? And especially in these fields that don't necessarily have a lot of infrastructure requirements, we know that a small amount of funding can be impactful to get you to that conference, to get you to that archive, right? So I think this is why the conversation about writing grants, I think, is relevant for people across all disciplines at this university. And I'm glad to see so many disciplines represented today. I also think that actually, if you force yourself to write a grant proposal, it can really be very helpful in enabling you to progress your scholarship. It forces you to organize your thoughts in a way you're going to have to do to carry out a project, right? And so making yourself write a grant proposal, or addressing that deadline to get the proposal in, is a good way to force you to discipline your thinking and advance your project. Okay. Now, another thing to realize, we'll talk a lot about research today. That's kind of perhaps the biggest focus. But of course, extramural funding can support all kinds of other things that are really important for this university, right? Across all the different dimensions of our mission, including community engagement and partnerships like Tech Growth Ohio, which supports entrepreneurship, is supported by large extramural grants. Pedagogical innovation, and also direct support for students, traineeships, in some cases scholarships. They're federal agencies that have a mission of trying to enhance the workforce in certain areas, and we get significant extramural funding for that. And also equipment and infrastructure, which may be related to research or other things. So if you look at the external funding that comes into Ohio University, actually only about 50% is labeled as for research, right? About the other half is for other kinds of things, typically would be labeled as for education or public service. Okay, so external funding can help us in many ways to advance the mission of the university. We'll focus a lot on research, but keep in mind there's plenty of other really important ways that you can help your program, help your department, college, the institution, by looking for opportunities to bring in external funding. Okay, so as you think about putting together a project, seeking external funding, one thing to realize is that you are part of a big institution with all kinds of assets, right? So it is natural. I lived this in my own experience as a faculty member. You spend most of your time in an environment with just the colleagues in your department or your college, but there's a big wide world out there in Ohio University, right? And a lot of smart people doing different things in different colleges, some of whom you've never met before, and they are potential sources of information to help you write a better proposal. And in some cases, you may even actually want to collaborate with them. Okay, so how do you find these people? If you don't know the people in the research division, that is, I think, a big part of their charge, because they're supposed to be the folks with kind of the global view of what's going on here, right? I think people in the college offices, like Dr. McCarthy back there, is also pretty connected with people across the university. But if you're saying, boy, I wish there was someone who knew something about using computers in this particular application, I wonder if there's someone at OU does that. There are people you can ask who might be able to answer that question. Okay, so the other thing is there's all kinds of infrastructure at this institution that you may not know about, and has varying levels of visibility. So to try to address that, the research division does have a shared equipment page, which has a lot of content, but there's other resources as well. And I would point to the same people to ask if you have questions, if you're looking for a particular capability. You don't know if it exists here or not. Just to list a few of these things, In the College of Communications, we have something called the Grid Lab, which is operating at a very sophisticated level, technologies and use of technologies for immersive media and virtual reality, right? The goggles and stuff like that. They're doing really amazing stuff, which is finding all kinds of applications in research and training, right? And they're doing phenomenal stuff, right? And so that's just one example. Some other examples, of course, the library, I think some of us tend to sort of forget the vast array of resources and technology that's over there, and it's important not to forget the level of that functions as a resource. Also, we have this Office of Instructional Innovation. If what you're interested in doing touches in some way pedagogy, these folks are doing all kinds of cool and innovative things. They're especially have capability for design and technologies around online instruction, but also for innovation in the traditional classroom. The Kennedy Museum is a sometimes overlooked resource as a place to showcase results, expertise around curating information, and also they know a lot about who's doing what across this campus. So the ... here is emphasized. There's a lot of other things. Use these people to help guide you to these resources if you need them for your project. Okay, I want to say a few words about collaborative research. And that is because this has become an increasingly common mode of working in your research and scholarship. You may already do this, maybe not so much, but you might be thinking about it. You'll be hearing more about it from some of the panel about how to put together a functional team and how that can advance your project. I just want to say a few words about this. I think it can be really, sometimes the collaborator can bring essential expertise you don't have on your own. It's kind of stating the obvious as a reason to collaborate. But I have to say, in my own personal experience, another really helpful aspect of this is it can help you maintain momentum in your project, right? If you have a collaborator and you have to, report out to them next month about the progress you've made, it sort of holds your feet to the fire to do that progress and not just kick the can down the road, right? So, and also I think having someone else, feeding in results and supporting information really helps give you, sometimes big projects, maintaining in your mind a sense of progress can be a struggle, right? If it's a real long-term thing, it's like, did I really accomplish anything in the last month, right? If you've got a team or collaborators who are sending you results, it's a real morale booster. It can be a motivator. That's my experience. It's also a way, if you have maybe more than one collaboration going at one time, one going full blast, one ramping up, it allows you so that all your sort of intellectual capital is not invested in one project if somehow that runs into some major stumbling block, right? You've got some other pieces to shift over to that might give you more progress. Okay, so a few comments. If you choose to collaborate, choose your collaborators wisely. And again, I'm kind of speaking from experience. It can be fantastic, but everyone is human, and if you don't find someone who sort of shares the same intellectual standards or philosophy of how to carry out scholarship or just how to communication's foundational, it can be a pretty miserable experience. So just be careful about who you choose to work with. You can connect, of course, with people on campus through the many opportunities here. Also introductions, again, if there's specific expertise, talk to the people we mentioned before to connect with that specific expertise. Professional conferences, of course, are a great way to connect with other people in your discipline who might bring some new dimension to your scholarship. And I also know of cases where researchers have just based on what they're reading in the literature, they identify someone at another institution and it's like, wow, boy, if I could put together what I'm working on with the expertise and perspective they bring to it, we could do something really fantastic. And you can essentially cold call someone to have an exploratory conversation about collaborating. And sometimes that can turn out beautifully. Again, I think you need to look carefully as to sort of personality issues, communication styles, and stuff like that before you dive in too deeply. But that can absolutely work. So to reinforce that, there's some things you want to sort out if you engage in a serious project, and especially a funded project. Okay. And that is sorting out at the front end things like roles and responsibilities, who's going to make decisions about using those funds, right? Who's going to make decisions about how the project progresses. Authorship, if it's joint and you're going to have multiple authors, you might want to sort out at the front end who's going to be the primary author in the paper and be listed as the primary author, or have some well-defined route to identifying that so there's not a big blow up at the end because people had different visions about this. Okay, so the National Institutes of Health has this nice thing that they talk about, the prenuptial agreement for a collaborative project, and it sort of lists the kind of things you would probably want to work out if you're doing a big collaborative project like this, which I really, whether you formalize it in writing, which is not a bad idea. In many cases, that's a good idea, even through exchange of email or something. At least it tells you about some of the things to think about, right? So it's really important if you get involved in especially funded collaborative research. Okay, so a few remaining thoughts about success with proposals. You'll hear more about this. Everyone knows it takes time to write a proposal. Big, large projects you may have 10 pages of single-spaced exposition about the description of the project. It takes a long time to do that and to do it well. Okay, so as in everything else in your academic career, you need to be careful about time management and don't try to write this up, 2 days before the deadline. It will not work. Okay, so plan ahead. And there's other reasons. Getting some input on that proposal from colleagues to read it and so forth. You'll hear more about that. That's a great thing to do, but you need to factor that into your timeline as well. Okay, so the next bullet point I listed here is, in addition to time management, is a little humility is in order. Okay, so I've had experiences talking to scholars who they're all excited about going for a grant, and they may not have written many proposals before. They're all excited. They write their proposal. They submit it, and it gets turned down, and they're just incensed. They're just offended. It's like, how can it be that someone would not fund my fantastic idea? This is just a crime, and I don't even know why I should write a proposal again if people just don't get it. Okay, so you need to accept the fact that the way you have communicated it, not everyone else may have grasped that it was the most exciting idea in the world. And even if they did think it was a pretty cool idea, sometimes there's only a certain amount of money, and someone else may have pitched an idea. Even though your idea is very good, someone else may have pitched an idea that's even more exciting, and you have to live with that, right? It's very competitive out there. And don't, again, a little humility is in order. Just accept the fact. Sometimes you'll get turned down. Sometimes you may get turned down even for bad reasons, and that leads to the third bullet point of patience. Sometimes you get the review comments back, and you will think they are just fundamentally wrong, okay? And it's a human process. Mistakes are sometimes made. Information is overlooked sometimes. That's just the way it is. And if you're not successful, I urge you to go back and try again, and that's the final bullet point of persistence, and you will hear that word many times today, that persistence is in order. If you go to my office and dig through the old files, you will see the nice congratulatory letters and a very large number of rejection letters. And the point is you have to keep trying to be, in many cases, to be successful in this enterprise. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Roxanne.
Okay. All right. Just checking out the technology here. Okay. At this point, does anybody want to move from over there to over here? Or, because if so, that's okay. Just grab your stuff and move over. It is kind of awkward. Wow. I can see half of you. Okay. How many of you have interfaced with the research division at this point? I'm just curious. Show of hands. Okay. How many of you have applied for the internal awards? Okay. How about external funding? All right, what I thought I would do today is to talk to you about the office and the internal awards and Leo and then pivot. But I'm going to ask, is that really what I need to do for you while I'm here today? So how many of you are aware of Leo? Show of hands. Okay, good. How many of you have gone into pivot? Okay, the majority of you, once again. All right, so I'm going to step through things, but I'm going to do it fairly quickly, and then I'm going to stop and let you guys ask questions about those specific things or anything else. Okay, the first thing is, hi, I'm Dr. Roxanne Malay-Bruni. Almost everybody on campus calls me Rox, so hello. Also, I want to introduce my colleague, Dr. Marta Gomez. Okay, if any of you were here 16 years ago plus, you will remember that at one time I was the director of grant development and special projects, and it was my honor to work with faculty on their grants. Then I transitioned into other things. For a long time, we didn't have that capability of helping you with grants. We do now. That's Marta. Marta is the new me. I'm the new her, old her, however you want to look at it. But the idea is that both Marta and I are individuals who love living vicariously through other individuals in your passions and your inspirations. And what we like to do, we genuinely do, is we want to hear what you want to achieve, and we're going to try and help you get there. And the idea is that we're going to go through a bunch of resources. So, the research division. Now, first of all, whenever I say research, I want to have a couple definitions. Research is defined by a rigorous methodology by which we further knowledge. So that means research and creative activity, both. Okay? That's the first thing. The other thing is that, at least in my mind, research is differentiated from scholarship. Scholarship is when you go to the library to figure out what's already been done. Research and creative activity is when you go to the library to figure out a project that's going to further the knowledge, okay? And so that is what we are trying to do. Obviously, you use your research to be an excellent scholar and educator, but we are always trying to further knowledge, and we are trying to be absolutely inclusive. And the old dinosaurs like me, we think about it as arts and humanities, social and behavioral sciences, physical sciences and engineering, life and biomedical sciences. The next generation doesn't even have that vocabulary anymore. They are interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary. All the grand challenges that we talk about now need us to look at these problems from various perspectives. Now, in the research division, as you can see, we have a lot of different areas that report to us. Basically, the way that you should be translating it is, we have resources that you may need. You may not know how to access those resources, at least prior to today, but what I'm going to tell you is that if you need any of those resources, what you're going to do is you're going to contact Marta or me, and we're going to put you in touch with the right people. Because very often, the scariest thing about starting a project is knowing where to start. Okay? So definitely talk to us. We would love to live vicariously through you. Okay. Internal awards. Many of you raised your hands. The internal awards, when I first took over, were a funding mechanism, but very quickly I realized that they really had to be an educational opportunity where faculty and students and staff brought us their proposals, and the onus was on us not only to make the decision about who would get the funding, but also we had to tell you how we made those decisions, and it was our responsibility also to tell you how you could write a better proposal. And for a long time, as workloads increased, there was a real pushback that we no longer use external reviewers. And I sat down with the committee, the Council for Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activity, and OURC, and Baker, and SCA, and all of them, and I said, okay, are we going to do a disservice to our applicants if we do not have external reviews? And the thought is that if you're going to take the time to write the proposal, then we are going to take the extra administrative time, and we're going to beg favors from people at other universities to give you feedback. Because what we're hoping is that if you get funding, great. But if you get feedback on how to write a better proposal in the future, that's even better. Now, how many of you have actually participated in any of our grant review sessions? Anybody on OURC? Okay, I see one person. I can tell you this. If ever you are asked by a program officer, either internally or externally, to serve on a committee, a review committee, jump at the chance. If you are not asked and you are willing, you proactively contact them. Nothing will teach you how to write a grant proposal better than seeing a bunch of your colleagues trashing somebody else's proposal, because it gives you the distance. They're not trashing your proposal, so you can be a little bit more objective. But you can see what they're pulling apart. Has that applicant told you what they want to do, why they want to do it, how they're going to do it, and why should you care? So seriously, if you get that chance, definitely participate. Okay, so so the question is, how long does it take? What kind of time commitment is it to serve on one of these committees? And what I would say is that for me, the internal awards applications are typically 5 pages, and I'm taking about an hour with each one of them, and we will very often ask you to read between 15 and 20 of them. That's the majority of the time. The review, 2 hours. So you typically get proposals 3 to 5 weeks in advance. So you can kick back and read them in the evening at your leisure. Then you have the 2 hours. And then for each of our committees, we ask you to be a primary reviewer on 2 of the proposals typically. What that means is that you're taking the committee comments and the external review comments and you're writing them in a constructive way for the applicant, because I must admit sometimes the review meetings are a little bit like Vegas. What we say there stays, there kind of thing, because it's not always constructive. And that's another thing that might take another couple hours. But overall, 20 hours, but it's a lifetime of experience in my thoughts. So for NIH, it depends, depending on the panel that you are on, for external reviews. I've had it where I have individual proposals in the past that I've been asked to read, 1, 2, 3, not hard. But sometimes you're on a full panel and you're reading 15, where you're the primary reviewer on 3 to 5 of them. So if you are asked by somebody, a program officer, ask them, what's the time commitment? That's totally fine. I would advise that. Okay, so for the internal awards, I think you all know, we have for faculty and staff, we have the OURCs and the bakers, $8,000 and $12,000 to begin a project, to complete a project. But also we have the air travel program. How many of you are like, I'm thinking about this externally funded proposal and I'd really would love to talk to the program officer. So the first thing that you do is you call the program officer and said, hey, I have the university plane. Can I come? No, don't do that. Okay, I'm only kidding. The way that the program officers work is they can't advantage people who have more resources than others. So what you say is, hey, I'm going to be in DC on these dates. Do you think I could stop by? Now, understand a program officer is basically a faculty member who thought it would be a really good idea to leave teaching for 3 years and is now stranded in administrative. And they are thrilled to talk to academics again. And if you take it such that, hey, I have this great idea. Actually, the first thing I always tell them is, I read the guidelines. Trust me, please. I read the guidelines. I have a couple questions. Would you mind talking to me? They have the money, you don't. Make sure that you understand that kind of relationship, okay? So you go in there, you talk about it, about your proposal, and hopefully that gives you better direction. So those are just some of the internal awards. It depends. Is it really valuable to go in person versus an email or a phone conversation? I can tell you, for me, when I talk to people, I need to see their eyes. I know that sounds strange, but I need to see how they are reacting. And so for me, a phone call is difficult. Now, a video conference is better. One of the things about talking with a program officer is not to convey your idea. It's to tell them your idea and then to listen to their feedback. So whatever mechanism you can do that most effectively, the better. The other thing is before I ever talk to a program officer, I always write a white paper, just a one-page abstract of the what, the why, the how, the why do I care, and the general budget. Because I know that very often they'll say, hey, before I talk to you, could you send me? And you don't want to have to wait a couple weeks while you create that document. Or once you've had a great conversation, they can say, hey, would you mind sending me something? I'd like to send it to one of my colleagues who's, running a different program. So you just want to be prepared. All right, Leo. I'm not going to go through Leo because I think it seems like a lot of you have used it before, but why am I talking about it relative to grants? Well, first of all, that's where you have your transmittal form. I'm sorry, but it is the way that we track things, and so yes, you have to do the transmittal form. But there's something valuable about Leo. Since 1981, we have been capturing data, all the proposals and all the grants through Ohio University. And let's just say that you have a grant that you want to go after from the NEH. You can go in there and you can see other people who have submitted to NEH and have received funding from NEH. And I strongly advise you to go and talk to them. The other thing is, you are new. You have no idea where you are going to find funding, the funding sources. The first cheat is always, whenever you go to the conference, always read people's posters and figure out where they're getting their funding. But also go to Leo and look up your department or look up colleagues who are doing similar research and figure out where they're getting money. So Leo is very valuable that way as well. Now, when you go into Leo, you're not going to be able to access the proposals. And we can't give them to you without permission from the faculty member, but we can ask on your behalf or you can ask on your own behalf. Okay, so that's what Leah is going to look like for you. Pivot. Normally I would go through and I would talk a lot about Pivot, but a lot of you seem to have familiarity with it. What is Pivot? It's a database. It's a very expensive but valuable database. It has hundreds of thousands of opportunities, grants, fellowships, travel awards, etc. Faculty can use it, staff can use it, students can use it, alums can use it. The first time that you log in, ohio.edu email, you have to be on the university campus. Thereafter, you can use it anywhere in the world. And as long as you keep your ohio.edu email, you can keep on using it, and that's why we have so many alums. Originally, we purchased it for the faculty members, and then I made the quote-unquote mistake of showing it to one graduate student in comm studies. And thereafter, they now outnumber you 3-to-1. It's amazing how many of the students are on there. So as faculty members, what I would say is that not only do you have to think about pursuing your own lines of funding, but it's also our responsibility to help the next generation, to train them, to provide the opportunities. And so Pivot is incredibly useful for them as well. Now, you can search for the grants, for the fellowships, for the internships, and for those of you who do not have familiarity with Pivot, we have 3 workshops coming up. I will try and say this slowly because it's not on the slide. So Monday, December 10th from 4 to 4:30. Wednesday, December 12th from 9 to 9:30. And then Thursday, December 13th from 3 to 3:30. We have these half-an-hour workshops. It literally does not take 20 minutes to show you how to use Pivot. The issue with Pivot is that it's not entirely intuitive how you fill it out. So for example, when you get in there, the first thing it says is, fill in the blanks, tell us. And I'm like, no, don't fill that in. Do the drop-down menus. And the reason why is, you can imagine, you have hundreds of thousands of opportunities that you need to catalog. I got totally frustrated once. I was looking for biofuels. Finally, I figured out that they called it biomass. And if I hadn't gone through the keyword pull down, I wouldn't have figured that out. These are just some of the little tricks that we're going to teach you when you come. If you can't make it to one of those meetings, just email me or Marta and we would be happy to sit down with you one-on-one, because once you learn how to use it, you will use it for the rest of the time that you are a faculty member. Trust me, it is incredibly valuable. And the thing that makes it valuable is you put in a search And then every Sunday night, it will keep on telling you opportunities that meet your criteria. You theoretically do not have to go back into the system. Absolutely. And by the way, they will be on the university calendar as of this afternoon. But December 10th from 4 to 4:30, and then December 12th from 9 to 9:30, and then December 13th from 3 to 3:30. These are the pivot workshops, and they will all be in 102 RTech. Thank you. Oh, go ahead. It is open, it's open to everybody at the university. Anybody who finds value, I will be happy to talk with. And Marta will be there as well. Sure. Thank you.
Well, my name is Sergio Joa. Am I close enough? Thank you. My name is Sergio Joa. I'm in the physics department. And so the committee has put together a few slides to try to sort of start the conversation on tips on, whatever, basically as a reminder to ourselves of things that we might have conveyed to you. But the idea of this is, of course, to make it a conversation, really. Please ask questions. Otherwise, it'll be extremely boring. So, for one. So, let's see. So, if here you are ready to, expose your soul to the funding agency of your choice and try to give him the basic idea of what you want to do. And so, here are some of the tips that are important. Of course, your idea must be doable, right? Plausible. It must have a background so that you can convince the funding agency that it is worth supporting. This may not necessarily be the case. You may have a great idea, but your agency may not be interested in your idea for whatever reasons. Their mission is different. So you got to make sure, by the way, whenever you choose your funding agency, that in fact, whatever idea or project you have in mind falls within their portfolio, because sometimes it doesn't. So it is, when we were talking about talking to the program officers, just that conversation can tell you, this is not something that we do, but they may have advice for you on where to go. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, the question, let me repeat the question is, in these times, are global projects less supported? I mean, if I paraphrase it. I don't know, I'm a physicist for one, I'm, very limited in knowledge. But no, in reality, I think that in any given agency, of course, there are climates that come and go, priorities, depending on the agency, sometimes in my experience, are set up by the researchers themselves. So like at the National Science Foundation, you may have a great idea, but if it's something that the community is not quite interested in, you will have a harder time. There are also historical things, like, a funding agency or whatever may have their work cut out for historical reasons, and if you're falling a little bit outside that frame, they may not be as supportive. So I think it depends. And I am also, in my experience, I think that many times when people see foundations, especially, not perhaps so much the public, but the private foundations, sometimes they see a need. And in fact, I would think that in your case, they might even have programs especially to foster global initiatives, be my guess.
Sergio?
Yes, please.
Is this working? Okay. Actually, most funding agencies now are looking global or international. They might not call it that. What they're talking about is collaborative, what Joe was talking about. And so you need to make the argument about how it's collaborative or multidisciplinary. There are two different criteria that are typically used by any funding agency, especially by NSF. There's one, the intellectual merit of how it furthers the field. There's also the broader impacts on how it affects society. That's the other argument that you need to make whenever you talk about your research.
So can I ask on a practical level? So now I just submitted an NIH grant that specifically asked for foreign justification. So in that, you're essentially justifying why it's not going to be conducted here. It is actually relevant and appropriate to conduct it in the other country.
Okay, so she's asking about a funding agency where she wants to do something international and they're asking her to justify it. It's not that they want to discourage international collaboration. It's that at times there are funding agencies that are funded by taxpayer dollars, U.S. taxpayer dollars, and that they want that money to reside in the United States. They will allow it with justification for that money to flow outside. That's pretty much what you're seeing there.
Yes. Any other comments or questions? But no. Okay. So, well, again, I don't want to necessarily be reading all the items in the PowerPoints. If you see something that might trigger a question, please bring it up. You know, we all tell our students, if you have a question, I'm sure other people have, so it's good to bring it up for discussion. So the basic idea of whenever you write a proposal, I think, is that you need to convince the reader, who would be a colleague of yours, that the project is significant, that there is a reason why you want to do it, that you're well equipped to do it, to carry it out, and that you've done preliminary work sometimes, that is very important, or that you have the right background, definitely, to carry it out. So some of the tips here, it is important, and I guess what Joe was saying earlier, this is a human endeavor, and then you are convincing an overworked faculty member at another institution to read your captivating prose and basically come away saying, this is the greatest project since sliced bread or whatever. And so you really need to spend time conveying that idea and your enthusiasm and just the fact that you're ready to carry it out. This is very competitive. The odds in various public agencies, pretty much anywhere, but the odds of getting funded are rather low. So you don't take it personal for one, but just think that just to make it above that cutoff line, it is very, very difficult. And you just have to work at it. All right, so there are a few ideas. So show a timeline. That is very important, especially if you have a number of tasks. It is not, to say, and I'll accomplish everything at the end of the period. Well, show me, right? You got to convince the reader again. Use figures to convey ideas, but not just to waste space, which sometimes is an issue. If you want the reviewer to read it, put it in the proposal, not in the appendix. Various funding agencies, of course, have strict rules about putting additional material outside the allowed space. Say the National Science Foundation typically allows 15 pages, and appendices are, for the most part, not looked at. So convince them, I already said that you have the skill and resources. And that last underlined item is extremely important. If you're writing in response to a call for proposals, make sure you read that call for proposals to the T. It's almost like biblical studies. You have to make sure that every sentence you understand and you've satisfied the requirement. You don't want to be bounced because, you missed item 20.7, all right? And agencies have a thing of changing guidelines on you every day. Yes, Yixing?
So I have a question. Okay. So I have a question about developing the supporting document, not as a program description, rather as a facilitated resource and data management plans. I guess we receive lots of workshops to how to write the proposal, but other documents such as facilities and other resources, I found that many people actually read that. I would initially I thought nobody would care. But unfortunately, lots of people, including the program officer, only reads that part. And developing a strong document like facilitating other resource and data management is sometimes beyond my ability, because I lack the information of what we have, what list we have, what is the outreach. Yes, I probably have received lots of help from Roxanne. Yes, true. But is that possible that our university can provide sets of examples and provide to the faculty who can get it easily, so we can follow the successful applications? And
Right. Let me, either way.
So now that we have Marta back, we are recreating a lot of the grant development pages that we had taken down. And I just saw Marta, she's taking notes. So we will make sure that those kind of documents are put on that page. You're right, in the past we've had, for example, NSF, NIH workshops, and we have focused on the program narratives, and we will consider maybe having some workshops on the supplemental documents.
yeah. Including the outreach activity we did in our university, we just sometimes lack
What
of
I would
idea.
say is all of you have different funding agencies. Email us. Tell us what resources you think would be useful for yourself and for others, and we will try and make sure that they're up by summer. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other point is just look on Leo to see who else has received that kind of funding and communicate with them, because they would have had to complete those documents, and you might be able to ask them if they'd be willing to share them, because those are things that once we create them about the facilities or data management plans, that we shouldn't need to reinvent the wheel each time.
Yeah, let me also, later in the PowerPoints, there are links to samples of precisely those documents, data management and facilities and so on. But it's also true that in talking to your colleagues, I think if anybody who submitted a successful proposal will have done that, and you can just get ideas of what's acceptable or needed or things like this. I mean, you can always, it may not be on the web, right? It may be that you have to get it from your colleague, but that is very useful. And of course, nowadays, Google can find you anything. Really, it's amazing. So.
It's also fair game that if you have specific questions for the program officer about those documents, or you want to send them and ask, give them enough time, but say, would you review this and give me feedback? I mean, many agencies, that's fair game for the program officer to do.
Mm-hmm. You have a question, please.
Just a quick note about just NIH has updated and has new format, very different than what they had just 6 months ago.
Exactly.
So anybody who has materials that they've submitted and can put, for example, would be much appreciated.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, here there are some specific aims. Do not get too complex. Simplicity is elegant. It is important that you have an overview of what, of course, you're going to carry out something very specific because you're a specialist, but it is important that you put it in a background and provide a nice background, right? And so that's, I think, what we mean by this. You got to describe it in simple ideas that can sort of appeal to a general reader. You have a point, Joe.
So I have to say it was not until I moved to the research office that I'd ever encountered this terminology of specific aims, but which is a huge thing for NIH, right? But I'd never heard of it. So does someone want to define what you're talking about by specific aim?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so most of my funding goes to Institute of Education Sciences, but a lot of our colleagues do NIH as well. And I mean, the specific aims are what they sound like in terms of specific aims of the project, but that is what guides everything else in the proposal. And you want to be able to, it's the research questions, what are you going to be answering? And you do want to be able to communicate them. I mean, there's a specific aims page, but that should also come through in the beginning, the middle, the end of your document. Your specific aims should be then very tightly tied to your measurement plan. It should be very tightly tied to your analysis plan. It's basically what is the entire framework for the proposal.
Just curious, how many of you are quantitative researchers? Qualitative researchers? Creative artists? Okay. So, specific aims. That is typically translated to objectives in NSF speak. That is your hypothesis. That works for quantitative people. For the qualitative people, you have your research questions. And for my creative artists, it's your vision statement. That's how it translates amongst the different methodologies.
Very nice.
And one mistake that since sometimes you cannot have 10 of those. You have, for NIH, if you limit it to 3 to 5, that's enough. Because if you are over ambitious, they are going to tell you this is too ambitious and you don't get the funding.
Right. It's not doable. It's too much. Right. Any other question? That's great. I'm glad that we're having a conversation. That's awesome. All right. So, yeah, it's Alan's. Alan's will go. I'll do the mic first.
Okay, I guess I want to just speak to your question before about all these different parts of the proposal. Yeah, realize there are a lot of parts to the proposal. Perhaps the abstract project summary is the most important part if you had to say one thing, but in fact, everything is important. And when reviewers read your proposal, they're really looking for reasons to reject your proposal. And any of those other components that you think, oh, it's not so important, that could be enough to ding you and lower your score and take you out of the ball game. So everything's important because a few people are going to be reading everything, not just the project summary. Okay, so with that, you're writing your proposal, you have an introduction, background, you then present your objectives, your specific aims. If you can accomplish everything that you set out to do, that you've listed in terms of your objective and the specific aims, what does that give you? What impact is that going to have? What is the significance of your work? That's what we're talking about now. So that will also be a separate section to talk about the significance of what your project is all about. So you'll see that in terms of the significance, there's significance to the particular field that you're working in and related fields to what you're working in, but then there's also the significance and impact to society at large. So you really have to speak to both of those. And you can look at findings from your project in terms of how is it going to change the field that you're in. You can look at it if it was some kind of medical research. How is this going to impact clinical practice as we move into the future? And how does this affect teaching and training in the discipline that you're involved with? Is it going to move that forward in any way? So, as it was already mentioned by Rox, if you're writing an NSF proposal, but this is basically true for other agencies as well, you have to speak to two things. The intellectual merit, which is the significance in the field or related field that you're in, and also the broader impact. So thinking on a larger picture, society level, what kind of impact is your work going to have? And it's these two criteria that NSF will judge you on, and pretty much other proposals as well. But NSF is really explicit, so much so that when you write your project summary, there are two boxes that you have to fill in. One of them is marked intellectual merit, and the other one is broader impacts. So they're that specific in terms of wanting that information. You can look up any project abstract that has been funded by NSF, and you'll see those two boxes completed by the PI. Rox, you want to add something?
I do. A lot of times you will be writing a proposal to a very discipline-specific audience. And in that case, the intellectual merit basically reigns, because they're all going to understand how could your research potentially impact the field. But now imagine you're writing an internal award, or you're writing to a foundation, or to some place where these are not experts in your field. Imagine being an academic and not understanding the proposal. Nothing pisses us off as academics more than thinking that somebody is making us feel stupid. Okay? So know your target audience. The likelihood is that if you have a non-discipline specific audience, you will be talking more about the broader impacts. Yes, you will talk about the intellectual merit, but you will have to engage everybody to understand why the research that you are doing potentially has large impact. If it's a discipline-specific audience, you're probably going to be talking more about the intellectual merit.
For the career, the NSF, the career awards, you can ask the program officer how is this proposal going to be reviewed. Sometimes they will tell you it is reviewed by ad hoc reviewers. That means it's people who are really specialists, so you can prepare your proposal for that level. Some others say is reviewed by a review panel. So that means you have to really speak to everybody, because they will be maybe physicists, but they will not be in the specific area that you are.
Have any other questions, comments at this point? Okay, I'm just going to go a little deeper into those two areas, intellectual merit. So obviously, how important is what you're doing going to move your field ahead or related fields across the related disciplines? Something that we've mentioned before that you can include here is just how well qualified you are to do the research. You really want to try to convince this panel that you are the woman or the man for the job here, that you've been training all your life to do this and you have the experience to make this successful. The other thing that you'll see there in the middle that's quite important is you really do want this work to be original, and you want it to excite the panel. You know, it's great that we have this Me Too movement going on in our country, but that's not going to cut it in science. The Me Too science is not going to work. So you really want to wow your readers. And that's something we get sort of kind of disappointed about when we read reviews and you haven't excited them enough. There is no wow factor, and I've seen that terminology used in reviews that come back. So you really want to excite the reviewers, the panel, about your work. Make it transformative. I know that word sometimes gets overused, but that's what they're looking for. Something that is original, that's really going to contribute and move the field ahead. The Me Too stuff just isn't going to be enough to win the day. Have you logically and clearly laid out what you're going to do? So do you have a plan, a really doable plan? And do you have the resources available to you to make this project work? So look around, see what resources are here. Make sure that feeds into what you're doing. When we get to the larger picture, the broader impacts, usually you can think about how does what you're doing going to affect the next generation of people, the next generation of researchers, the next generation of creative people that are working on the project as you've outlined. So all that training aspect for the students, maybe postdocs, maybe technicians, how are you going to impact the future through your training of these people? You want to outline that. What about underrepresented groups? So at least I can speak to NSF is really keen on training of underrepresented groups. And for here at Ohio University, we have the Appalachian students as a good targeted group that are considered underrepresented. So we have Appalachian students here, we have first generation college students here. Those are two things you can play up here locally. Of course, if you do work with any minority students and you've had a history of training minority students in your lab, so much the better, and you should highlight that as well. But I think in terms of what most of us have access to, first generation and Appalachian students are an easy card for you to play. So how are you going to disseminate your results? So I think here, obviously, you can talk about going to meetings and presenting at conferences and publishing, and that's quite obvious. But are there other ways that you can disseminate your work that would make you stand out? What about things that would be community outreach programs where you go to schools and you talk about the kind of thing you're doing, right? Maybe you're not going to get into all the details and the nitty-gritty, but contact community groups, reach out, have outreach programs. That's a big part. They're looking for innovative ways to have you disseminate your work, not just the standard ways, which you certainly can include here. And bigger picture, how is what you're proposing and hopefully what you accomplish doing going to affect society? How is it going to make things better in our world? What impact does it have at that kind of scale? So there are some examples of this, and Sergio already mentioned a lot of these things you can just Google and you can find examples. We have a small proposal library of successfully funded proposals that Brian McCarthy has access to. You can talk to him. But as already mentioned, if you know somebody here that's doing work similar to you, reach out to them. You don't know them, cold call them, email them. You don't feel comfortable doing that? You can have an introduction through the research office, through Brian McCarthy. Don't be afraid to contact your colleagues. They're a great resource here, and they will have the kind of documents that you were asking about. Sure, there may be some instances when a faculty member doesn't want to share, and that's understandable, but I'd say the vast majority would be glad to help you out. So that's been my experience. So don't be afraid to reach out. So as an example of one of these kind of other documents, NSF does require, if you are requesting a postdoc, to have a mentoring plan where you lay out exactly what you're going to do. So there are some examples there that you can click on, and you can also, as I said, go to the resources that I've mentioned already to find out more. And I would use this information as a guideline. Don't just cut and paste, obviously, right? But read this information that other people have put together and then think about it on your own. How could you tailor it to what you're doing? Perhaps, how could you make it even better? So not just cut and paste, but use it for ideas and try to improve it. And I will go back to say all of these documents are important, and it goes back to leave yourself enough time to write these proposals. Because if you're writing your proposal and you're just worried about those 15 pages and you think you're going to make it, and then you realize you have these 5 or 6 or 7 supplemental documents, conflict of interest, postdoc mentoring plan, data management plan, your budget justification. You have all these other parts to do, and you've just focused on those 15 pages. You're going to be in trouble. So leave yourself enough time to work on all those different documents that make up the proposal. So, Julie?
I was going to say one thing. Whenever I work with a faculty member on a grant proposal, I always say, know your audience. So know the solicitation. Go ahead and read up about that funding agency and what their priorities are, but also figure out who they have funded recently. That gives you great ideas. The other thing is if the program is a non-competitive how do I say this? They can't have a renewal. Okay, there are plenty of funding agencies that one and done. Okay, not NSF, not NIH, but a lot of foundations and smaller grants. In which case, you can contact the grantees and ask them for a copy of their proposal because you're not threatening to them. They're not going to get another grant from this agency. And we've actually had a lot of success doing that with some of the smaller agencies and a lot of the foundations.
Good morning. I'm Julie Owens. I'm from psychology. So unlike the physicists and the plant biologists and the historians on the committee, I actually work with people, human subjects, so children and teachers and parents, and most of my work is trying to develop and evaluate school-based interventions. So with that gives you a little context for some of the things I'm going to say or can contribute. So one of the things, again, aside from developing this great idea, you have all these other supplemental things to do. And one of them is to develop your team and to convince the reviewers that your team is the perfect team to carry this out and that everybody has a specific role, and without them, it couldn't be done. And so you kind of need to think about the difference between who is a co-investigator and who is a consultant. So typically a co-investigator is somebody who does all of the work with you from start to finish. They're sort of equal partners. Whereas a consultant plays a smaller role, and they may just come in for one piece of the project. So maybe a topical expertise, or they have a particular technical expertise or statistical analysis. And they cost less oftentimes too. So if your budget is tight and you can't have a co-investigator, sometimes you can work it out so you still have that contribution to your team in a consultant role. And so thinking about also, if you are a junior person, definitely putting somebody on that grant who has grant experience, who has experience in the field, who can help you, keep up the timeline, keep you true to what you say you're going to do, help you publish. Who help you manage the budget. At least in our field, the days of a single investigator on the grant are over. It is all about multidisciplinary teams, collaboration, and so convincing them that everybody has a unique role and an important role to play. In our world, we also have to decide if we're going to accomplish what we're going to do in a multi-site fashion or a single-site fashion. For multi-site, there's a lot of benefits. One is you only have to do half the work because the other site is doing the other half of the work, and that is fantastic and really helpful. But there are challenges to that as well because you have to hire sometimes double the staff, so that's a drain on your budget. You have to make sure all the procedures are consistent across sites, which is challenging, and communication comes into play. I mean, we have weekly meetings with our other sites to make sure everything is done the same. We have cross-site meetings to make sure we're training staff in the same way. We have integrity checks to make sure everything continues to be operating in the same way. So there's challenges. And then also this idea of choose your collaborators carefully. Everybody on the committee has an unfortunate story in that domain. And we also have really fortunate stories. And so collaborating, to me, really brings synergy for your work, really stimulates new ideas. But it's important to maybe start that relationship gradually. So maybe work together at a conference or on a smaller piece before you go into a 3 or 4 year grant project, because that's tough to get out of if it's unpleasant.
Julie, just to know, closer to the mic.
Oh, thanks. Okay. So single site, you're in control of everything, which is nice. And so there's, you just have to think through advantages and disadvantages to that. And the colleague who was talking about international work, we do have a cross-site project in Canada right now, and I had to convince them that what the issues were in the Canadian schools are very similar to U.S. schools, and that what we're going to learn from this project will contribute knowledge back to U.S. schools. So that's an example of the justification. Project managers, as faculty, it is glorious to have a project manager because they do a lot of the day-to-day work that allows you to stay focused on the science and the scholarship. And you need to choose that person wisely, right? So your choices might be hired staff who is totally devoted to your project, and there's nothing better than that, but they may not have as much of sort of motivation for this as like a graduate student or a postdoc who really is using this as a stepping stone in their career. Certainly graduate students are the least expensive option of all of this. And so it's, wonderfully rewarding to work with graduate students, but they also, at least in our field, have other competing demands. They have classes, they have to see clients, so they can't be in on your project 100%. Postdocs, they're more advanced than graduate students, probably able to help you write and crank out a lot of the outputs. But, you also have to think about devoting time to their mentoring because they have career goals too, and you are a stepping stone to their next. So you just need to think about sort of the expertise you need, the time you need, and the amount of mentoring you may put in. And then all of this needs to be justified. So you need to talk about who's going to do what percentage of their time they're going to do, how much they're going to cost, and that's what goes into the budget narrative. Budget talk to research division. I think for all of us, right? Stephanie Kearns is our pre-award manager. Is that true for the college? Yes. For arts and sciences, yeah. So Stephanie used to be in our department. We love her dearly. She's fantastic. So you can literally call her and just conceptually say, I want somebody to do this. I need somebody to do this. I need this material. And she will translate that conceptual knowledge into an Excel sheet that you can then sort of manipulate. And I always start with put everything in that I want. And then I look at the bottom line and see, okay, I'm $500,000 over. Now what do I peel back? But thinking about personnel, they're the most expensive thing along with big equipment. So you need to sort of think about what do you need to carry this out in terms of co-investigators, consultants, and the equipment and put that in first. And then think about other things that might be maybe more luxuries like travel or, other smaller expendable materials. But thinking through those things, and again, you don't need to do this alone. The research office is super helpful with budgets and budget narratives. Yes?
Can I ask about summer salary for those of us who are 9-month faculty?
For those of us who are 9-month faculty, so can you talk a little bit more about summer salary then?
Rox can.
Throw it back and say, what is your question about summer salary? A lot of funding agencies will only allow a maximum of 2 months, not the 3 months. And the way that we calculate your salary is based on your academic year salary. There are some colleges now on campus who say that if you want to have, summer salary, that you also have to put in some time for academic year. I'm saying that because not everybody here is arts and sciences, I noticed. There were a couple other people. Welcome. Hi. But your specific questions can be answered by Stephanie. And you just want to work with the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs and make sure that you tell them what you want, and we will figure out all the nitty-gritty. It's not just a salary, it's the benefits, it's the insurance, it's lots of other things that we will help you work out.
Can a faculty member be told no, they can't apply for summer salary if they are a 9-month faculty?
To my knowledge, the answer is no, but if you are relying on resources of the university during the summer and for whatever reason those resources might not be available, then it might not be feasible for you to do the project as you envision. I think it's very much on a case-by-case basis, but I can tell you the university wants you to try and have summer salary and to do research over the summer. So we're going to try and help incentivize in any way that we can.
And I guess just one other word that was a surprise to me when I was a junior colleague is how much benefits cost. When you are budgeting in a postdoc or a full-time faculty member and you're like, oh, okay, we're going to pay them $45,000. And then you need another $30,000 on top of that in your budget for their benefits, right? And so that's a huge chunk. So again, don't wait till the end to figure out the budget. You do need to figure out your science so then you know what you need to do, but plan the budget well in advance. So some agencies, when you say you're going to use it for travel, they literally want it down to the penny. And so we do have some nice resources here from finance about, per diem costs and travel costs and things like that. But some have wanted us to say exactly how much the hotel is going to cost and the flight and, all of that. And then these are just other domains. But keep in mind that there are both indirect costs, right? So if you're writing a $100,000 grant, what is that? 48.5% of that, in addition to your $100,000 that you're going to spend, comes back. You have to budget for indirects. There is also an office camp rate. Do you want to talk about that?
What are direct costs versus indirect costs? Okay, so the direct costs are your operating expenses that you're going to put towards the project. But research and creative activity costs the university money to keep the lights on, to keep the labs going, to keep the library, all of these things. And so I believe that the indirect cost rate right now is 50.5.
Oh, okay.
It's gone up. It's negotiated every approximately 3 years. That is the fully loaded indirect costs. There are some agencies, for example, foundations, that will say, we will give you money, but we will not give you indirect costs. If that is in writing, then you take that to the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs, and they can work it out such that you can apply for that grant without loading the indirect costs. But it is a conversation that we need to have, because essentially the university is saying, all right, we're going to let you do this project, but we're not going to bring in any overhead. And that costs us money in the long term. Also, if you don't do your project, if you do it on campus versus off campus, there are various different rates. Rather than go through those exact numbers, what I'm going to tell you is that when you work with the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs, because you are required to do that, they will go through and tell you what that is. Building the spreadsheet is actually something that takes time. So make sure, just like Alan and Sergio say, give yourself the time to write a competitive proposal.
Thanks. Any other questions about budget? Okay, great. So just thinking about pilot data, not all grants require it. Some of the early development grants, it's a development project, so you don't have pilot data. But I will say that reviewers, if you have it, welcome it, but use it very strategically. So you want to use pilot data to show first that whatever you're proposing is feasible. So if I can say to them, look, I can recruit 100 kids diagnosed with ADHD in a year's time, then my proposal of getting 85 is feasible. Right? You also want to use the pilot data to show that you have proof of concept for your idea. That yes, sounds like a great idea, and look, here's some preliminary evidence that is leaning in that way. So use those data strategically, and then also you can use it to show that the people who you've specified in your staffing plan have the ability to do what you say. So if we are proposing a single subject design or focus groups, and I say, look, here's a publication by my colleague who has done focus groups before or has done single case design work, then they're much less concerned about, well, who's going to do this, because it's a very specific technical expertise. Do make sure that it's well connected to your research questions. So I think in the beginning, I was just excited I had pilot data and I threw it all in there. And part of the feedback was like, how does this, connect to the research plan? So just having pilot data is not enough. You do need to connect it to, I'm asking this question and here's feasibility related to it, or here's preliminary evidence related to it. I do think as a reviewer, the grants that I review are 25-page single space. They're awful. It's absolutely awful. And so, a figure is worth 1,000 words. And so if you can use a figure to very quickly communicate feasibility numbers, effect numbers, anything, we who review it welcome that. Questions about pilot data?
Can preliminary or pilot data be specific that it's only going to establish feasibility and not much beyond that, if that's all you have, and that
sure,
that is still considered relevant?
Yep, just make that point really clear that the reason I'm showing you this is that I can do this project, or this method is feasible.
Right.
And I just wanted to jump in with two things. One, not all preliminary data is positive data. It could be you have preliminary data that said, ooh, I tried that method and it didn't work, and therefore that's why I'm doing this method. The other thing is never show any preliminary data, n equals 2, for example, without any error bars, that doesn't support your hypothesis. It's amazing how many proposals I read where the preliminary data does not support the hypothesis.
The other little trick that I feel like I've learned over time is at the end of here's all my great ideas and the methods, I have a little section where I'm like literally talking to that reviewer that says design considerations. And I tell them all the things that I didn't choose and why. Maybe not all the things, but I think they're going to nail me on, right? If I'm like, oh, if this reviewer gets this, they're going to ask why I went with this route instead of this. And if you put that in there head on, sometimes that buys you one more reviewer saying, oh, okay, it's not that you're an idiot and didn't think about this. You thought about it, and here's why it doesn't match your research question. So that has been a useful little trick that I've learned over time. And then data management, we've talked a little bit about this, but some of these data, oh, go ahead.
One more question about
Yes.
preliminary data. So let's say you have preliminary data that, as Rock said, perhaps isn't significant, perhaps because you only had enough funding to support a small pilot of it. So you don't have statistical significance. That's exactly why you're applying for the grant. How is that viewed?
That's okay. You just need to say, it's not a statistically significant result, but we think that there is a trend, and therefore we need to increase the sample size. You just need to justify. That's what the proposal is all about, justifying.
Great. Okay. So just talking about data management, some of the plans require you to have specificity about what are the formats you're going to collect it in, where is it going to be located, if it's secure, confidential data, where is it going to be stored, if you have 2 sites, how is that going to be shared across sites, how are you going to archive it. Some agencies now require that if you do a large randomized clinical trial, those data need to be made public afterwards. How are you going to do that? And so we do now have at Ohio University Redcap. Has anybody heard of Redcap? Okay, well, if you are a quantitative or survey researcher, Redcap is the research electronic data capture. It's an amazing survey tool that allows you to collect survey data via email links. So we can send out emails to 100 teachers, and their kids can each have a separate link, and it all comes back in a HIPAA compliant way. So it's a really nice way to get large amounts of data very efficiently and very securely. And so we do have training. Someone can come to your department and do training on Redcap if you're interested in that.
Quick question about Redcap. Sorry. So with Redcap, does that mean that the data is
Available for any researcher to use who can access Redcap, not only the PI?
Yes, you can just log on however many staff members you want to have credentials and what level of credential that you want them to have.
And people, let's say you want to keep it, though, within that purview of people. Can you close it to that group?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. You have to have your own unique login. Yeah.
And then do we have any affiliation with OSU's Redcap?
I don't know that specifically, but Redcap is universal in the sense that we have many multi-site projects, and we do get them OU credentials to log on to our site, or we log on to their site, so it can be cross-site. So I think you just have to choose a primary location for it to rest.
Are we part of their consortium?
That I don't know.
Consortium for what?
Research resources, and one of the things they were talking about was Redcap, as well as recruitment. They have a recruitment office that helps researchers with recruitment, and
I think that the function we collaborate on certain things. The function you're describing would be local.
I see.
Okay, and then I think I turn it over to Steve for mentoring.
Hi, I'm Steve Miner from the History Department, and I would correct Julie on one thing. I do deal with people, they just happen to be dead. So there is that.
They can't give consent to that.
It doesn't matter whether they consent. I don't have to worry about HIPAA.
That's the difference.
So I was brought here to talk about other matters in a sense. I'm the odd man out on the committee since I do humanities. I'm in the History Department. And but there's a lot of overlap in what we do and what people in the sciences do. And one of the things that our committee tried to do was to create a rather different culture of collaboration. at Ohio University. There's an awful lot of untapped talent out there of people that are doing things that are analogous to whatever research you may be doing, and you can tap into that. And one of the ways to do this is to work as a collaborative community from the outset. Historians, there's been a lot of talk here about collaboration. Historians are a pretty solitary bunch. We write books alone. We write articles alone. There's not a lot of multi-author stuff, as there is in the sciences. Nonetheless, you can collaborate when you're doing these things, when you're writing up proposals or when you're drafting books or articles. And I belong to a community of 4 people who read each other's material, not only book manuscripts, but also articles and applications for grants and travel money. And that's been enormously helpful to me. And I would reiterate what other people have said about the importance of choosing your collaborators. Collaborators, for people who studied the Nazi era, by the way, has a bad sound. But collaboration in matters of scholarship is something you have to be very careful about. You have to have people in your group who are well enough informed to be able to comment effectively on what you're doing. They have to be temperamentally suited so that they both can give constructive criticism and can receive it without having their feelings hurt, which is a point I'm going to talk about in a minute. But they also have to be committed to actually doing the reading and doing the commenting on the materials that you're going to produce. So you have to pick your collaborators carefully. And there's also a problem with junior faculty and senior faculty. If you're junior faculty, you're still probationary, and you have people who may be voting on your promotion and tenure. So to submit to them your work can be problematic, and it can be problematic for the senior people to comment on your work. So it's often good to find people in departments that are not your own department, but are analogous. In my own case, one of the people that I've learned to really respect and work with is in the Department of Social Medicine. She's a historian, but she's not in my department. I've worked with other people in classics and world religions. That's, again, analogous to history. It's not history, but it's analogous. Political science, economics, things of that sort. So look for people across disciplines who might be at your level, but may not be judging your application for promotion and tenure. That's a really rather important thing. And in this matter, Brian McCarthy can help because he has a number of people who are prepared to enter into collaborative arrangements. So I think that's a very important point. You might want to work with peer consultants in your department, certainly, if you're writing up proposals, to have a senior person perhaps read them and comment on them. But if you're going to enter into sort of a learning community, it's good to have people who aren't in the chain of command, so to speak. Let me go to the next one. Yeah. See, what historians are not good at is advancing. What do I do?
First hit escape to get that thing off.
There you go. Well, I thought I did. Escape. Okay. Now, there you go. And here's the most human of humanities. Getting rejections is part of life. It can be a creative part of life. It can also be a very distressing part of life. I have a daughter right now who's applying for grants and graduate programs, and I've been going over her work, and she's been getting comments from some of my colleagues and hasn't taken it well. We've all been rejected. We've all received reviews that are unfair. I've received reviews that are factually incorrect, which drives you crazy. The thing that you have to do is realize you're never going to persuade somebody by writing an angry letter back at them. It just doesn't work that. When was the last time you were persuaded by getting an angry letter from somebody? You're not going to persuade them either. What you want to do is take the good out of the comments that you get and also solicit more information. So what I would do is one thing I learned from Abraham Lincoln: if you're going to write a nasty letter, put it aside. And certainly don't send it for the first day, and maybe get somebody else to read it. That was something I learned as chair. Never send a letter in heat. Always write, think about it. You may calm down. You may decide to trash the thing. You may feel better for having written it, but don't ever send it at the first blush. The second thing is read the criticism carefully. Sometimes it's actually quite useful, even if it's put in an undiplomatic fashion. And have other people read the other people you trust, read the review that you've gotten, even if it's an unfair one. You can work out your anger with them, and you don't have to actually do so in communication with the judges. One of the things you have to remember when you apply for a grant is that the people on the committee, it's a subjective process, particularly so in the humanities. It's more subjective, I think, than in the sciences. You may not be rejected not because of the merits of your application, but rather because of the composition of the committee and the interests of the members on the committee, and that can vary from year to year. So take that into account. It may not be any failure in your application. It may be the composition of the committee and the interests that year. Reapply. Reapply, having incorporated what you can by the way of the creative comments that people have made. Don't let failure stall you. Use failure as a way to improve your application for the next year. Those are most of the points I'd like to make about sort of collaboration. Did you have a point, Julie?
I just wanted to say it's another good use of program officers is that after you write your response to reviews, like we get 3 pages to respond, and you think you've really hit the mark, ask them in advance if they'd be willing to read your response to reviewers and give you feedback. I mean, I've gotten feedback that like, that's great, but that's not the point that they're most focused on, right? So I think if you have, again, this is all planning in advance because you want to give them time to review it, but I would use the program officer. I mean, they were often sitting in that room when your grant was reviewed and they heard what the issues were. So to me, it's sort of like an insider's help.
Yeah.
So just a quick question. I feel comfortable finding people who will peer review. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's not. People are busy, especially colleagues. So I'm wondering, I know of someone in the School of Education whose full-time job is just to help faculty members with grants. And I'm wondering if we have someone like that in the arts and sciences and maybe Rox or you can do that. But the other thing I'm thinking about is on the very end of it, like professional editing, just because having someone who's really good at writing would be really helpful to make sure there's no obvious errors, better ways to say things like that.
So there are a couple things. One, the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs is really where you want to start, because as soon as you know, they're going to be reading the solicitation and making sure that you are compliant and responsive. But now when we get into the nitty-gritty of the project narrative and the supplemental documents, yes, the answer is that Dr. Marta Gomez is your point of contact. Because you do not have a grant development officer in your college, she has been assigned to your college as priority. The other thing that we have this year is, and hopefully moving forward, is that if you give her enough time, we are willing to send out your proposal for a mock review where we will spend up to $500 to have a professional in your field who is willing to do a fairly quick turnaround time. But that does mean that you will have been working with Marta, that your associate dean agrees that you've put in the work, and that we're going to have this investment. So typically we need at least a month. We need to have that proposal a month ahead of time for that mock review. So that way you have a couple weeks afterwards to incorporate their comments.
I have a question. Does the research office have the rejection letter so they can analyze the failing, statistically analyze the failing points, and so that they can own the
So the question is that when you get feedback as an applicant, do we get those letters? And the answer is no, we don't. That typically will only go to the applicant. And so you need to share that with us.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, Julie, I think you're next.
Oh, I am?
I believe so. Psychology.
Okay, so just in terms of talking about the reviews, I think Steve's point is read it again, write, have somebody else read it, write it again. Do not send it off cold. I mean, we probably spend as much time in the response to review document as we do recrafting the proposal, because at least as a reviewer, that's often the first thing you start with. What was the last feedback they got, and then have they addressed it? So do making sure that you read it very carefully, and maybe if you want to digest it with the program officer to figure out, there's multiple points, what was really said in that room and what's the key thing I need to respond to. You can also choose to be selective. If there's several points and you choose to address 3 out of 4, I mean, maybe they won't be paying attention to that detail, but, that's a bit of a gamble. So you do have to decide how explicit you're going to be, or strategically talking about sort of themes and how you address those themes. But again, getting sort of feedback from another colleague who's been through it or from the program officer is probably going to be your best bet.
I just wanted to add one thing. There are times where you really do need to entirely rewrite your proposal, and hopefully the reviewers have been that honest with you. Please do not submit without a significant rewrite. But there are times where they just point out a few items, and you need to address those items. And I do not advise you to totally rewrite the proposal, because maybe what they loved about that proposal is now gone.
Yeah. And so again, like it was said in the beginning, I mean, if people are reading 5 to 7 25-page documents, I mean, they're looking for reasons to throw things out. So, just going back to that, is your idea interesting? Does it grab somebody, or is it boring? Is it feasible? You may have the greatest idea that's going to solve the world's problems, but there's no way you can, achieve it. So that's another reason it's going to get thrown out. And then the innovations and impacts we've talked about. So sort of in summary, these are out of order. These are sort of our top 10 list from the committee. You have to be persistent. The only way you're not going to get a grant, or the surefire way to not get a grant, is don't submit. So in our center, we just make sure you're submitting something every cycle. And in the beginning, that seems so daunting, but once you get 1 or 2 in and it becomes a habit, then you just, when's the next cycle, and you continue to submit. When you only get, the funding line is 4%, that's the only way to get it is to be persistent. So my advice, always talk to the program officer. That seems to work in our field. Don't write in isolation. There's lots of benefits of collaboration. It's a different perspective on the work. It's more like what a reviewer is going to do. It's going to increase your proposal prior to getting it into the real reviewer. You got to have a good idea. So vet that early. Vet that early with the research office, with your colleagues. Convince them you're the best person to do the work, both in terms of feasibility and expertise. And that's hard if you're a junior person, so convince them you have the team that will help you do that work if you're junior. Read other grants that are successful. Once they're funded by public agencies, they are publicly available. So you can either contact that author directly. That is more efficient, but if they don't respond, you can go through the program officer, and they can, through the Freedom of Information Act, obtain that proposal. Complete all parts and start early so you can do that, because there are many other parts besides the scientific piece. Sell your argument, read the guidelines, read the current guidelines again, highlight part of those things that are relevant. All of it's relevant. What's that? 100 pages, yes, of just the RFA. And did I say be persistent? Okay. Yes. Okay. So just a couple other things. As we mentioned, our committee has tried to put together a proposal library. It's rather small. Not all colleagues are interested in sharing their proposals publicly, but if you really want one that's not in there, talk to Brian or Dean Shields, and they might be able to help you. There are graduate student research funds available, right? $1,000 annually in the fall and in the spring. We have an NEH workshop. Is that coming? Yes. And do you remember that one. Okay, associated with our committee. Yes. Okay, I was thinking it was don't you have?
We're still waiting for him to get back.
Okay.
He did get back to me ultimately, but I should probably contact
Okay. So we actually have two things in the work. One that was sort of initiated by our committee that we are still going to pursue that would be much like this with a panel of faculty who have had different types of humanities grants and different types of experience with book publishers. That will be forthcoming. So in the same way you got the email about this. Pivot workshops you've heard about. Dr. Gomez you've heard about. So these are all resources that you have access to.
Okay, so, okay. Yeah, because I'm leaving with a lot of questions about the social sciences, and I'm someone who does archival research, and I'm kind of walking out of here with many questions, so maybe I'll save them for that workshop. It's kind of silly. It's like I've been looking over that Leo database that and it's really interesting, but there are very few scholars, colleagues on there who do the kind of work I do, and so, like, I feel really naive asking this question, but like, I don't even know what to ask for, like to put together a grant to do archival research. I think we're so accustomed to kind of doing that on the cheap, like doing it quickly, getting in, taking photographs, leaving. Like, I actually can't really envision what a full-fledged grant proposal would look like. And I would love to see models, and I would love to have a sense of what we can ask for. I think because we're so used to kind of smuggling it into our current travel funding that we don't think bigger.
We can certainly help you.
That would be great.
Yeah. Why don't we talk after the?
Yeah, I was just going to say one other thing.
Okay, thanks.
About 40% of our internal awards go to the arts and humanities, and we do try and make all of those proposals available. And so if you contact Karma West, that's westc@ohio.edu. That's a good way to look at example proposals as well.
And Brian, is it true that we still have in the college a fund specifically for the social sciences and humanities, an internal fund for that kind of work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I got that one. So thank
Okay.
you. Thank you. Yeah, just got it. So yeah, I'm thinking more like if I were to try to go external with this kind of work, what would that look like? I mean, I do appreciate that internal funding is great. Yeah, but thinking about going external.
Thank you very much. We are discouraged to submit the same manuscript to different journals simultaneously.
Right.
How about the same thing, applying for funding from different sources? I think it's tempting, especially when you are thinking about a very small project, maybe $10,000, $20,000 at most, and then you want to apply to many places.
There are very few funding agencies that state that you cannot apply to different agencies with the same grant. For example, the American Cancer Society is one of the few. But what they all say is that you should tell them that you are doing that, and you cannot take the same funding from two different agencies for the same thing. There are a couple different ways to do it. You can shop the exact same proposal to different agencies, or what you can do is you can do phase 1 to this agency and phase 2 to this agency, but you just have to be aware that if there's any overlap or contingencies or reliance of one on the other, then of course whoever does stage 2 wants to make sure that you got stage 1 first. Those kind of conversations you can have with Marta, and she can step you through it.
If you're an odds person, the reality of getting both of them is low. And so I would say submit to both and find ways to do that that are palatable to both RFAs, right? So we might submit one to NIH that is more sort of diagnostic and pathologically focused, and submit the same thing to the education that's more student outcome focused. But the research questions from our perspective are fairly similar. So I think if you have a research question that you can sort of shift that a little bit, I would say from a research, a faculty colleague, do it.
I would just add and say, if you are going to shop the same kind of proposal to 2 or more agencies, you really should tailor them to what that agency is asking for. Don't just send the same thing.
Right.
It's like the equivalent of you're looking for a job and you have the generic cover letter. Is that generic cover letter going to impress your potential employer as much as a cover letter that's specifically written to, I want to come to Ohio University, and you get into the specifics, and that's the same way with shopping this grant. Address the needs that that particular funding agency is interested in and hit the right talking points. Each one is specific in terms of what they want. Other questions?
So I haven't worked on any grants till now, and I'm in School of Journalism. My research is very different from other people do, from what other people in my school do. It's mostly psychology, cognitive processing of media stimuli. I'm working with the Grid Lab on a project currently. Now, from that perspective, I don't know where to start, because there are people who have worked on grants and who are working on grants, but it's mostly training and professional training. So from the perspective of, let's say, a mid-career academician, where and how do you start?
Okay, this is where Rox gets to be brutally honest, and for those of you who know me, that's 90% of the way that I am. When I meet with faculty and students and staff, I will typically give you one 30-minute meeting where we can just say, hey, let's consider everything. But by that next meeting, I want you to be able to tell me, this is what I want, this is what I aspire to do. What puts me in a very difficult circumstance is when a faculty member comes to me and says, I can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way through Z. What should I do? And I'm like, I can't make that determination for you. Now, the first meeting, I'm totally happy to just say, let's talk about the universe. But after that, we're going to be talking much more specifics. And at that point, Marta, I think you would agree too. We're asking you, what is the objective? What is that hypothesis that you're testing? What are your research questions? What's your vision? And we try and get you in alignment with various funding agencies. It's not that you should be chasing the money, but realistically, there are times where there is money available for certain projects at certain points in time, and that there might not be those opportunities at other points in time. So we're here to talk with you.
Okay. So from what I understood from the presentation, that most of the times you look at a grant and you kind of follow the guidelines. Now, if you have a specific project, so let's say I don't know what opportunities are there, but I know what project I have and what I want to work on, and I come to you, you would help me in matching my project to a funding opportunity.
That's right. What we're going to do is we're going to sit you down and we're going to show you how to use Pivot, and we're going to ask you to do it on your own first, but if you have any issues, especially with multi-interdisciplinary or particularly transformative research, sometimes it's difficult to find that funding agency. But you saw Marta, she just went like that. I don't think it's because she's cold, it's because she's eager. She's waiting for you to contact her.
Thank you.
So just a final word. First, thanks for participating and asking questions. That makes these a lot more enjoyable. And second off, you will get a survey via Redcap that will ask you about your opinions about this or ideas for future workshops that these two will take into account. So we appreciate your feedback. And I don't know if you want to say anything in the end.
I have just a very few items. I didn't want to break in a whole lot, but I have a few items to pass along of observations. So back on the whole topic about when is it worth visiting DC, right? Some of the best outcomes I've seen are the case where maybe it's a little ambiguous what program, agency, whatever it fits in, right? And I know of a case, the NSF, where a person was doing something slightly interdisciplinary, they went to the first program officers. They said, well, your program doesn't really fit here, but let me take you down the hallway and introduce you to a colleague. Ended up, it's very efficient. You can go around and meet all these different people and find the right fit, and it worked in that case. Another example, someone, if you're doing something that's applied and potentially relevant to the Department of Defense, which funds all kinds of things, right? I mean, the Navy has a huge program in breast cancer research, for example. If you're doing something kind of applied and you don't know which agency because it's Byzantine, in other case, you can go and spend a whole day, and we actually have a firm in DC that can help schedule these appointments. You can go around and try to find where your research lines up, okay? So those are some of the best cases to do that. All right, now, a lot of talk today focusing on federal agencies, right? You did hear, I mean, humanities is something we're eager to support. There's going to be a special focus on that. I just want to make an observation. In the last 2 weeks, one of the most recent grants that I've seen coming to the College of Arts and Sciences is a substantial six-figure award in the humanities, which will fund a multi-year postdoc. So we can do this, and we are doing this. That's through a foundation. Okay, and so not a federal agency, through a foundation, but we can help you identify foundations. And in the development side of the university, we have a person who specializes in finding funding through foundations. Okay, the last item I wanted to quickly mention is, since it's kind of, I served on a proposal, it was a panel this fall with a federal agency and read some gigantic stack of proposals. And one thing that wasn't mentioned, but I think is very pertinent, is actually the look and layout of your proposal. Now, depending on the funding source and their requirements, it may be very prescribed what the format looks like, down to minute detail. In other cases, there's a little more latitude how you lay it out. And think about the poor person, like I was, reading through a stack of material like this. You're reading through this document, and it is easy to get bogged down if you're reading through a full page of single, just endless text, single page, single spaced, and, use paragraphs, right? Use images that advance your argument, not just decoration, but somehow contribute to the argument. The other thing is, think of how you break it into subsections and put headings on the subsections. And you can use, graphical devices like start the first sentence with an underline to help indicate, oh, this is like a key idea I should zoom in on. Or if there's something embedded in a paragraph, you need to be judicious how you do this, but occasionally maybe there's something really important you don't want to miss, boldface it. Okay, don't overdo it or it looks ridiculous. But if you do it in a judicious way, it breaks it into bite-sized bits of text and content that the reader plowing through all this stuff will much more easily digest. Okay, so and when you see one that doesn't do that compared to one that does that, it's a huge difference to the reviewer. That's all I have to say, except to thank you all for coming today. And again, once again, I want to thank our panel so much for putting this together, and our colleagues from the research division. Thank you so much. Contact us if you need help.